So, for those of you who may not be familiar with it or may have forgotten, Elijah McClain was killed by Aurora police in 2019 at the ripe age of 23. Three officers and two paramedics have been indicted by a Colorado grand jury. The Attorney General, Phil Weiser, the special prosecutor for the case, announced the 32 count indictment on Wednesday. 32 counts. A grand jury came to this decision on Thursday of last week, though, but they held off on making it public so that they could talk to the McClain family before announcing it to the public. Randy Rodema, Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt. Those are the three police officers. Jeremy Cooper and Peter Sukunik are the two paramedics. McClain died after officers convinced these paramedics to administer a sedative with a dose. Thank you. With a dose that was for someone 4 times his size. He sat brain dead in the hospital for several days before his family finally decided to take him off life support, where he passed on. I will not lie to you. I've had this conversation with other folks. Our homie Trent, who's in Colorado, was following this very closely because apparently he's had to do security detail for some of the political figures that are involved in this whole debacle. But we were having this conversation, and I told him I didn't believe that the paramedics were going to be charged. And he said he agreed that he didn't believe the paramedics would be charged with anything. But here we are, almost 2 years later, and 2 years later from the incident,
August 2019.
Thank you, sir. And the paramedics were charged. They were indicted. 32 counts. Wow. One of the most fascinating parts about this is that the district attorney, when this whole thing came down, first thing out his mouth was that it was justified. There's nothing to see here. Move along. He continued this premise and this narrative for several months afterwards until there was a national outcry.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, he did not apologize. He didn't change the narrative. He just kept quiet. It then ultimately, because of the outcry, it went to a special prosecutor. That's why it's on the AG's desk, the Attorney General for Colorado's desk. And he took it to a grand jury. And the grand jury said, yeah, there was enough to see here. 32 counts worth. What do you guys think after hearing about the news? Are you, I don't want to say satisfied, but are you content with seeing this move forward and seeing that there's going to be some sort of punishment, or is this just par for the course at this time after George Floyd, that this is what it looks like, and we just really have to see if there's actually a conviction?
Well, yeah, it definitely seems like a major step in the right direction, in terms, especially with the unexpected convictions or indictments of the paramedics involved. The amount of outcry needed to get this kind of action, I don't believe should not have been necessary. The facts could not be plainer. But seeing these extremely poor examples of leadership and humanity involved, having them have to eat crow in some way is somewhat satisfying. But I still would like to reserve judgment on what the actual outcome of this will be. That's a lot of indictments to fight past, to disprove. So it'll be hard not to think that they will not be convicted on somewhere, if not at least half of these counts. But yeah, I will wait and see. And then there's a host of other things that could occur between now and that trial.
Oh.
I am ecstatic for his mother, Shanine McClain.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long 2-year process just to get to the point of an indictment. 2 years to get this. That's 2 of Elijah McClain's birthdays. She still resides in the city. She's still there. She has to relive this incident. She's had to deal with it in this capacity for the past 2 years. It's not necessarily surprising to me that the paramedics were indicted also, simply from the standpoint of them injecting the amount of ketamine that they did. There was no clear outside non-legal justification for that sort of treatment. And I don't want to be that pessimistic guy, yet I will be and say it's an indictment. It's a 32 count indictment. 32 counts is a lot of counts, man. This is going to be an incredibly difficult case. But I'm glad that they're moving forward with it. I'm not overly optimistic for convictions across the board. Do I believe that everyone deserves some sort of penalty? Yeah, I do. Go ahead, Crush.
No, I actually have a question. L, do you think the term medical neglect will come up?
I think it is
in some form, because I mean this is a misapplication of training, correct?
Well, see, I think that's when it's going to get difficult to prove. Even if it's medical neglect, you still have to prove intent. You have to prove whether they intentionally did this to cause harm, or did they accidentally give him too much ketamine. That's where it gets, and listen, that's where it's going to get incredibly tricky at. Listen,
They start calling instructors in and getting out textbooks and grades and
I hope and again, I'm one of those black folks, man, who when I see these type of incidents and I see the indictments and I see the arrests and I see all these things, that to me does not equate justice. And I say that because I'm not sure how to define justice in these situations. So I don't, whatever these folks got, whatever these people who harmed and took this young brother's life get, is that justice? I don't know. But as the family, I'm allowing, Sister McClain to define what justice is for her and her family. And if this is what she's excited about at the moment and she's looking, expecting, certain things, I'm supporting the family. But fuck these dudes. This is what these cops do. This is nothing new. Unfortunately, this is what it's like in wartime settings.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, at least to your later point about what justice looks like. And I battle with that. I battle with that a lot in these circumstances where you see that it's what should have been a benign interaction with a police officer ultimately ends up in the death of a black brother or sister, right? So what does justice look like? For many of us, we talk about justice looking like them or the offender going to jail, even throwing them under the jail if that's the case. But nothing, no amount of years that you give that cop or whomever will bring back that loved one. And when I think about justice, I think about a hole being filled. And maybe that's not fair, but I think of a hole being filled. Sure. And I don't think that there's any amount of time that you can sentence a police officer. And this is not to say that they shouldn't be punished, but I don't think there's any amount of time that could be served that will help to heal that spot that the family has to fill and ultimately probably will never be able to fill. I think it's another thing to think about how this incestuous relationship between the district attorney's office and the police department. Because that conversation, just think about how that conversation started, that you not only saw the video evidence of this young man being accosted by the police, assaulted by the police with no probable cause or reasoning, and then still saying, Nah, they did everything by the book. And not necessarily because you don't see that there's something wrong in what they did, but because you are afraid that you'll jeopardize the relationship between yourself and the police union or the police that you rely on to do your job as an
Sure.
elected official. You need police support to get your position where you are. And for you to allow that to supersede what is supposed to be just, I won't even say justice, but just, I don't care how many times I see it, it still blows my mind.
And he was clear though. Dude was like, he felt like there wasn't enough evidence to prove the officers caused Brother McClain's death. And it was just like, so what did you need? And that's the question that I wish reporters who didn't work for these huge media companies had the balls to ask.
What did you need to see to say that it was
justified? Like, but because that's a valid, fair question after you make that statement.
Exactly.
And remember, these dudes are elected officials. So then you got to begin to look at the makeup of Adams County, Colorado. Who puts these people in office? So and all of that plays a huge role in whether or not we get quote unquote justice. Is not simply just making the arrest. Then you got to talk about the jury. Who's going to make up the jury in Adams County, Colorado?
Mm-hmm.
You know, all these different factors come into play. So we see it and we're like, man, there's no way in fucking hell that these people should not be arrested, sentenced, and thrown away. But then you have this whole other white supremacist apparatus that is working behind the scenes.
I'm
to
glad
make
that
sure
you
that this
said
shit never takes place, man.
I'm glad that you said that, because immediately after this announcement was made public, you know that the police union came out and did what police unions do. They defended these officers. By extension, they defended the paramedics and said that they did everything by the book, that there was no reason for them to be indicted, and that it was just essentially an act of God that Elijah McClain died at the hands of these police. Not because you lambasted two paramedics, and they're not innocent by any stretch of the imagination.
So he just happened to die.
That's the stance, or
man, you want to talk about fighting words?
That's the alleged stance. It seems like the union is thinking, because it said the way they're making it seem was that these officers did everything that they were supposed to do in this instance.
They love to act like a gang. They love to act like a gang.
I think that we would be remiss. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the caller that brought all of this to the forefront in the first place. Someone saw this young man walking from the store simply because he had a mask on coming from the corner store, and thought that it was a necessity for them to call the police. In their calling the police, apparently, they called and told the 911 operator that he does not seem dangerous, but he looks suspicious. He does not seem dangerous, but he looks suspicious. Besides the fact that that information wasn't relayed to the officers. Anytime white people, I want people to understand that when you call the cops to handle any situation, you are essentially calling for deadly force. It doesn't matter what the circumstances.
You're weaponizing them.
Because the cops are not going to come there and leave their guns behind. So there is the strong possibility, especially when it involves Black people and other people of color, that it can go from 0 to 60 in the blink of an eye, and someone can end up dead.
Police don't stop crime; they escalate situations with their presence. When you read the transcripts and read the 911 calls of what took place when Brother McClain tells the police, "I'm an introvert. Please respect my boundaries." And then the police escalate the situation to the point where then they're using a white supremacist tactic by threatening Brother McClain with being sicked by a dog. If you don't stop, we're going to get to.
They put the spit bag over his head to restrain him.
To restrain him. This is if you see the size of Brother McClain, this wasn't a robust, heavy set, thick dude. This was a young, skinny brother who was just
pounds.
5 people.
And they try to put, so the police department is defending yet trying to slide blame to the paramedics. And the paramedics at some point, honestly, they have, at least according to what I've read, they have the discretion. They can't be lambasted into providing any sort of sedative. They have the discretion to say, no, I'm not giving, or we're not giving any sedatives. Talk less of giving him a sedative of 4 times the dose necessary to sedate him, if you decided to sedate him. I think that medical neglect is going to have to come up, like Phil was talking about earlier.
It has to. They have to, because they didn't check for any vital signs. They didn't lay hands on McClain until they're putting him in into the ambulance. They actually administered this high dose of ketamine without taking his vital signs, without laying hands on him. They diagnosed him from afar with excited delirium, is the term that they used.
Yep. Well, for the family of Elijah, I hope whatever form justice needs to take, I hope that they get it. I don't know. I can't imagine being in their shoes. I hope whatever they're looking for, that they end up getting it, though.